the Northwest home for paranormal, you're listening to U.S. Phenomenon with your host, Mario Magana.
From the Pacific Northwest and the shadow of the 1962 World's Fair, the Space Needle. Good evening. I am your host, Mario Magana. This is U.S. Phenomenon. If this is your first time here, we thank you for checking us out. If you're a returning friend, thank you. We'd like to first thank our affiliates, KOSW, KGRG, KAPY, our flagship station, KVI, and the newest member to our family, North Beach Community TV. Welcome. If you're not a subscriber to the podcast, you can go to your favorite podcasting platform to subscribe. All you have to search is u.s.phenomenon. Make sure you put a space between the dot and the phenomenon. Or you can go to my website, onairmario.com. Tonight, we're going to talk about the East Coast, West Coast rivalry during the 90s when this thing was super huge. And for those who may have not lived in that time period, and I kind of relate this East Coast West Coast rivalry to some of the biggest band members who passed away in time. 80s would be the John Lennon assassination or murder, the Amy Winehouse. You have also the Nirvana, Kurt Cobain suicide, death as well. What's interesting to me as you kind of go through, there's so many of these tragic accidents or deaths over the years. And when you look at these things, it's just huge as a genre of music goes through its evolution and continues to grow and change. This being the 90s, hip hop was huge. And this East Coast, West Coast rivalry was probably the biggest thing going on during that time, with Tupac and Notorious B.I.G. being the two number ones from Bad Boy Records, Notorious B.I.G., and Tupac being the number one artist over at Death Row Records. And so that rivalry was just heated up and amped up. And what's so sad is that we're looking at two individuals that if life was altered and these two individuals would have not have been murdered, how the outcome, how that would change the hip hop community and how that would stand the test of this time, of how these two artists would have evolved, and would they have smashed that East Coast, West Coast rivalry and become, allies to continue to bring up the hip hop community, to bring it to that next level. Now, before we get into that, I just want to spend a few minutes and just to thank our affiliates and our listeners, and remind everyone that, again, I do this show as it is my hobby. I do not get paid to do this. So people who are like, if you think that this show is bigger than it really is, look, it's a very small knit group that puts this show together, with myself, my daughter, Mark Christopher, who's helped out with the Paranormal Story of the Week, Jeff Jen, who's assisted with the website, Jay Middleton, and a bunch of others who have been contributors to this show, this program, this talk show. We thank you so much. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I have to say that if you love the show and you subscribe to the podcast, thank you. I really appreciate that. But it doesn't go unnoticed. What we're looking for is your input. If you have something that you think we should do as a story, or maybe you want us to check something out and investigate, please send me a text. Let me know what you want us to cover. It's important to us and important to me as a show, someone who does this by himself with a very small knit community. It takes a village to put something like this together. So I thank everyone, including all of our affiliates who have continued to be with the show. Last week, I was in great spirits. I was very not well, was sick, and I'm still recovering. And It takes a lot to make this thing happen. And so tonight we're really getting into something that I feel near and dear to my heart, which I grew up in hip hop. I love the music. This tragic story about two very successful rappers that were just on fire at that point in time in their careers, just huge, big time in the community, where it's just like, wow, these two individuals, you couldn't say anything about Tupac, and just Tupac was on fire to get himself out of, and we'll cover all that stuff. We'll cover those. We'll cover those, and we'll get into like what would we like to call what caused this? What was the cause of these things? Um, was was this a crime? Was this something that could have been avoided? If you're watching, well, I want to thank our listeners and viewers via Twitch and YouTube this evening. Thank you for watching. If you're hanging out with us, you can be a part of the show. If maybe you have something that you want to comment, and you can send us a comment via the browsers there, as well as send us a text at 775 990-5151. If you're like, oh, I want to, maybe you have something you want to add, call us. You can call us or text us, send us a text at 775-990-5151. It's interesting about the Tupac and Biggie East Coast, West Coast rivalry. Now, a lot of people look at this as maybe you didn't grow up in this time period, but what's interesting to me is that you had two of the largest hip hop artists at that point in time making a ton of music that is even to this day still culturally almost fresh. When you listen to it, it doesn't seem like it really has changed much. When you look at the big picture, it really it's, to me, I feel that their stuff is still fresh. It really is. You can listen to any of the Tupac songs, any of the Biggie songs, and it is very much a part of today's society, where most people are like, oh yeah, I remember Tupac, I remember Biggie. These two guys were, they were the stuff. Everyone loved these two guys. They loved them. I mean, you had this thing where you were either a Tupac. You were either Tupac or you were not a Tupac fan, or you were a Biggie fan and you were not a Biggie fan. You kind of went through those two things, and you were either a part of it, or you had your set. You were like, oh, I'm an East Coast guy, or a West Coast person, or I'm an East Coast person, and that's awesome. Yeah, we get that. It's when you look at the whole picture of everything. You're looking at two of these artists here that had gone through, I mean, who were friends at one point in time, and it just continued to evolve, and the situation becoming of the East Coast, West Coast rivalry, which really fueled these two artists in the mid 90s to really, within 6 months of each other, be gone, which is unfortunate to me. I mean, we're talking. I mean, what was this a conspiracy? Was this a conspiracy where maybe Suge Knight and Puff Daddy wanted to keep the money? I mean, it's a possibility. These things, these cases are still fresh. They're still open investigations. The FBI has not solved these crimes. And going through this, let's go through the history of the East Coast, West Coast rivalry, which started in the mid 90s, which was fueled by the East Coast rappers, Notorious B.I.G., with Puff Daddy in New York City, Bad Boy Records, and the West Coast bass rapper Tupac Shakur, Suge Knight, LA bass label Death Row Records. And this is where the fuel really had, as you look back at the hip hop community, the music was there. I mean, the culture was just so wide and just evolving in the 90s, in the mid 90s. And that fuel just continued to push through. You're talking either you're an East Coast person or you're a West Coast person. Most of us over here on the West Coast, we're West Coast people. I'm not going to lie. There were some really awesome joints from Biggie. But again, going through Tupac's albums, growing up with Tupac, I loved Tupac. Just the music was raw. It was, if you ever have a chance to check out the documentary by Quincy Jones III, I had this interview a long time ago on a previous show, and I just cannot find the interview, and I lost his contact, but it was such a great documentary. I'm sure you can find it on YouTube. I think I saw it. So it's basically just find Quincy Jones III, Tupac documentary, fantastic documentary, really shows Pac and goes through some of his inner circles with Treach from Naughty by Nature, and goes through some of what Pac was doing to continue to get himself out of the death row situation, to further his career and move himself out of Death Row Records and starting his own stuff. But getting back to the East Coast West Coast rivalry, what's interesting to me was that the FBI hasn't, evolved or, solved this crime. And is it coincidental? Was it a conspiracy? Was this a setup between two of the record labels, Tupac being part of Death Row, Suge Knight really wanting to keep a lid on Tupac and just keep his royalties because he knew he was out? And was it that the same goes for Sean Puffy Combs? Did Puff Daddy want to move Notorious B.I.G. out of Bad Boy and keep everything within? I mean, these are all things that can be all talked about. If you want to be a part of the discussion, or you have something that you want to add to the show, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any feedback, we'd love to hear from you as well. You can send a comment via Twitch or YouTube, or you can send me a text at 775-990-5151. And as we get into this here, again, thank you for being a part of the show. Now, in the mid-90s, this became one of the largest fueled things. I mean, think about what was going on in the mid-90s. You had the OJ trial. You had the riots in LA. I mean, so a lot of things were going on. There was evolution. There was some change coming through. And this rivalry was also fueled by that as well. Was fueled by two charged individuals. Now, was this because of, going back to, November 30th, 1994, Tupac was scheduled to be in Manhattan for Little Sean for a recording session, and to help pay for his legal fees that he had as he arrived. One of the members from the Junior Mafia group from Bad Boy affiliated saw Tupac, said, "Hey, what's up?" or did some type of greeting to him. And then he entered the building. Two gunmen ordered everyone in the lobby and to the floor. And when Tupac hesitated, he was shot 5 times and robbed. Now, as Tupac was leaving on a stretcher, obviously he gave the number one finger to Biggie and to Bad Boy affiliates who were also present. Now, they were on a different floor as well. Now, when we talk about that, that definitely would also continue to fuel that East Coast, West Coast rivalry. One day later, Tupac was convicted of a sexual abuse case. Afterwards, Tupac implied in an interview with Kevin Powell of Vibe that Biggie and Puffy and Uptown Records were involved in and responsible for the attack at the Quad Studios where Tupac was shot. Bad Boy said they weren't involved in any of the shootings in 1995. Who Shot Me, which was the B track to from Biggie. What's interesting to me when you look at that, obviously there are so many other rumors, pieces of evidence, TikTok videos, things of that nature, and having a discussion even last night about this. Over just last night, having a discussion about the whole East Coast, West Coast situation. Some people said that when Tupac was shot, gang members were supposed to get money from Bad Boy Records, which would have tied them to the attempted murder of Tupac. If that's the case, I mean, I don't know if that's true. It's an alleged story. So, and that's the great thing about being in the conspiracy business. It can be talked about. Again, it's not, it's all hearsay. So, and as things kind of continue to ramp up in the entire show, in regards, not this show, but in regards to the East Coast West Coast rivalry going into the Source Awards, let's go back to the shooting. Pac had been hit, and Puffy and his team said, "Hey, we're not a part of this. We were not. We had nothing to do with this." Then you move to August of '95. Suge took a big dig at Puff Daddy at the Source Awards, continuing to fuel this East Coast, West Coast rivalry, telling people, hey, if you want to come to Death Row, come to Death Row. We're not going to be all, the music producer's not going to be all up in the videos. And we've all seen these things. Now, to get back to what blows my mind is we're talking about the murder of Tupac and Biggie within 6 months of each other. Is it coincidence that Tupac was murdered? But was this a retaliation from an incident at the fight, then having him, killed? Look, from everything that I've read in the FBI reports, which we can take a look at, it's unfortunate that they had former PDs, in the security team within Death Row. I mean, this can take so many different angles. My thought when I, looked at the case was when Tupac got in the vehicle and he was leaving after this altercation at the MGM and they were going to the nightclub. At that point, things are fueled. Now, that has nothing to do with the East Coast, West Coast rivalry, but now you're talking about black on black crimes with gang members. Now, yes, they had gang members a part of the Death Row security team and had former, LAPD officers a part of the security team. If this was a setup so that Suge Knight could keep the royalties of Tupac, would just blow my mind, which would be unfortunate because we lost probably one of the best hip hop artists of all time between him and Notorious B.I.G. Now, if that was the case, why wasn't when Tupac was shot? What interesting to me was that him to be shot in the car. How was Suge was missed? How was that even possible? Interesting to me that it seems so strategic. And why would you ever leave in in a caravan situation, especially after being in a brawl? Maybe security being completely different. I would have definitely had myself in an unmarked car. I probably would not have gone with Suge. I probably would have went in a different vehicle just to disguise myself, just to be out of the heat of the situation. Look, retaliation is crazy out there, and it happens regardless if it's Tupac, if it's Notorious B.I.G. The retaliation, it just kind of blows my mind that, okay, so you're in the MGM, you get in this big fight. Okay, so then what happens? So Tupac gets shot. You're looking at, in the 90s, this being the biggest tragedy to hit the hip hop community in such a long time. Just blows my mind. When we come back from the bottom of the hour, we'll continue talking about we'll get into the Notorious B.I.G. Piece of the East Coast, West Coast rivalry, and could have these two been able to reconcile their friendship, because they did have one prior to this East Coast, West Coast rivalry. Again, if you ever want to be a part of the show, maybe you have a comment or a text, please send it to me. You can send your text either to StreamYard, you can send it to YouTube, or you can also send your comments to Twitch. You can find us on Twitch as well, twitch.tv. Just search On Air Mario. You can be a part of subscribing to our podcast by going to your favorite podcasting platform and searching US Phenomenon. When we come back, we'll continue the discussion. Did this East Coast, West Coast rivalry, and after the end of this, these two dying, and I love the stories. Everyone's, no, Tupac's still alive. He's living in Jamaica, living large. It would be interesting to me if that was the case. I'd love to have Tupac come on the show, or someone say, oh yeah, Tupac was spotted at whatever. And it's funny to me because when you look at the whole situation, like, oh yeah, maybe he wanted out and was like, okay, pretend to kill me, rush me out. But it's sad because everybody wanted Tupac to be alive, to not be in that situation. Because it's unfortunate. It's like any tragedy like this, like the John Lennon assassination, or the death of Kurt Cobain, Amy Winehouse, and the list can go on and on and on. But when you look at these deaths, their explanation for grieving is huge in these parts. And when you're going through that grieving process, you ask why did this have to happen? It's an unfortunate thing, especially when we were talking about this last night. I was having a discussion about it, and yes, this is black on black crime. This didn't have to happen. We know that Tupac was a poet. We know that Tupac was very well educated, reading books and multiple books over and over just to have a better understanding and asking questions and being so smart. I really do think that he would have been able to change how the hip hop game looked, felt, on a different perspective, taking it to an educated level to talk about the injustice of, the black on black crimes, and the injustice of how maybe people were underpaid, and how he really, wanted to make a change, no pun intended, but to take it to that next level. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case when, Tupac died and was shot near the Flamingo Road, intersection of Flamingo in Las Vegas. He was taken to the medical hospital where he died 6 days later. In 2002, Chuck Phillips wrote Who Killed Tupac? A report. The shooting was caused out by a Compton gang, by the which would have been known as the Crips. Now, we know that there were Crips and Bloods, but Bloods were mostly associated with Death Row. So yes, the retaliation of that played into effect. That had nothing to do with the East Coast, West Coast rivalry, unless you talk about tying Death Row tying Sean Puffy Combs to the murder of Tupac by saying, oh, the Crips were going to be paid money to, take out Tupac. I mean, that's a possibility. These things have, popped up in different types of, again, situations on TikTok and all these different viral platforms across the social media platform. When we come back, we'll continue this conversation, and we'll talk about Biggie's death 6 months later after Tupac's on September in September of '96, when Tupac was shot and murdered. All right, we'll be back. You're listening to US Phenomenon. All right, welcome back. For those that you are joining us, and thank you for watching on our affiliate, North Beach Community TV. Thank you so much for being a part of the show. If you're listening to us on one of our radio experiences, thank you so much. KOSW, KGRG, KAPY, our flagship station, KVI. We've been talking this evening about the East Coast, West Coast rivalry. Was this something that had to happen? Was there a chance to be able to change, to fix this? Did it need to happen? when we look at this, you're looking at two of the largest individuals, Tupac and Biggie, who were the number one artist on the labels, on each label, their East Coast and West Coast rivalry. Again, Tupac being on Death Row Records, Notorious B.I.G. being on Bad Boy label. And, you can take this in so many different angles. Was the murder of these two individuals, was it strategically done? Obviously, the socials have run rampant. We're talking about what I would say is a black on black crime. These are black on black crimes. And for those who have seen the movies like, Menace to Society, Boys in the Hood, those movies taught a lot of us during our younger days how we evolved as a community with the regentrification. You're learning about that during the early 90s and how that happened in LA, and even now still happening here in Seattle, or different parts of the country as well. Look, I mean, these things are going to happen, the evolution, but it's unfortunate that we're talking about two individuals who are no longer with us, who were some of the number one artist for these two labels. And was this strategic? We're talking now that, when Tupac was murdered, you talk about Notorious B.I.G. and then taking himself down to, California, the track, I'm going back to Cali. And what's interesting to me is that he was not afraid, but also had, a lot going on during those time periods. And what's interesting to me about that piece, the Notorious B.I.G. Murder, was why has this case not been solved? It really goes back to um, the investigation by the FBI. Did they do a thorough job? Did the LAPD do a thorough job in regards to solving these cases and going through what happened to Christopher Wallace, Notorious B.I.G., going through a situation where he was in LA. How convenient is that? Is that this young man, this adult, hanging out in LA doing his thing, being tied in, and was March 9th, we're talking 1997, Christopher Wallace, aka Notorious B.I.G., was murdered and was left at was leaving a museum from LA that he attended, a post music awards ceremony, and he was in a Chevy Impala. To me, the involvement of this murder and how this hasn't been solved blows my mind in regards on so many levels, on what alleged and what's been redacted from the FBI report, with gang members, former security, former LAPDs in the investigation, and then what really took place during the incident and how they rushed him to the hospital. Why hasn't this case been solved? Is there too much within the case that that may be tied into gang affiliation, or maybe an inside job? I mean, we just don't know. We're talking about within 6 months of each other, you have two of the largest artists of hip hop gone. Tupac from Death Row Records, and then 6 months later, Notorious B.I.G. gone. It's just unfortunate situation. You talk about, at this point now, the East Coast West Coast rivalry is just decimated. It's gone. I mean, you're talking about two artists that were just going at it with these different diss tracks and just throwing stuff back and forth. They both were worth millions, as their rivalry continued to, to build. And alleged the LA officer who was a part of the gangs. I mean, this could have been a retaliation too, where they're like, nope, we're going to get him because of the retaliation of Tupac being murdered, them now retaliating. Look, regardless on how this alleged happened, if it was gang affiliated, according to the FBI, I mean, it really boils back to something that probably didn't need to happen. Can you imagine if, we lived in a world today where two of the largest artists of the 90s, Notorious B.I.G. and, if, and Notorious B.I.G. and Tupac were still alive? I mean, how does that look? I mean, to me, I'm like, oh man, I don't know how that would look. How would hip hop have changed? It would have evolved. You would have had, I think Pac would have taken more of a poet and an educated stance to evolve the community and to bring up the community, to educate everyone and to get them to a part, to be able to use their voice and not to just be a part of the system, and how to break, generation society, I'm the word misses me, but to have them have Tupac just continue to push through and take it to the next level. And Notorious B.I.G. probably would have done something a little bit closer, but I think he just would have continued to evolve his own personal label and continue to probably work with Bad Boy, but do a spinoff on his own, and continue to grow with his own groups and and mentors and his little mentorees as well. This would have changed the entire landscape of hip hop for sure. For sure, for sure. So thank you if you've been watching this evening. What a treat for us to just kind of like sit back and just have a conversation about what I love. And I don't so much listen to it as much as I did as a younger youth teen hip hop. Mostly now it's changed. Sometimes you'll hear one on the radio, or you'll in a Spotify or some playlist you have, you're like, oh yeah, I remember that was the cut back in the day. I mean, you remember those times? Which one was yours? I mean, just some of those tracks that spent so much time with Biggie and Tupac, just putting so much work into these albums. Recently I saw a conversation on social about Notorious B.I.G. copying his his persona. So someone said that he kind of stole this Mississippi rapper's persona and song. Now look, back in those days, we have to remember this was the 90s, and you would make this track, you would make a track, and you would distribute it on cassettes, and everyone would get a copy of this instrumental or the beat, and you'd write on it, or you'd spit your lyrics all over it. Doing my research today, and kind of, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, that's how that happened back in the day, that these artists would get these tapes, mixtapes, or these cassette tapes, put them in, and then they'd rap over them out in the streets. And so everyone would have these beats. So that is very, very possible that this is how this played out for someone saying, oh, Notorious B.I.G. I think because of what I've seen and in documentaries, I just don't believe that Notorious B.I.G. was that type of artist where he would have like stolen someone's likeness and flow. It's possible, but from everything that I've seen, I just think that he was just one of those artists who just kind of was on his own. He was doing his own thing. He was very bold. He was very, in regards to just arrogant about himself. And he was like, this is how I do it, And that's why I say that in this piece, I think someone trying to get a click, the bait click hits, try to get more hits on all your socials. It happens. I mean, so anything these days, to kind of get people involved or to like their stuff. I mean, you're going to start to see some of these different stories to come out now. I mean, it's just the same thing as U.S. Phenomenon. People are like, "Oh, you sound like that other show." Yes, it very much it does, because that's what I listened to as a kid growing up and loving that piece. So yes, you do see similarities. And being a big fan of Art Bell, he's just we had conversations about this multiple times. I'm a big Art Bell fan. For those who may not know, he was I would call him the godfather of conspiracy radio. um but getting back to this case here, the Notorious B.I.G. and Tupac case, um it just is to me like sad. You're talking, I mean, watching so many videos and my head just being spinning from Jada Pickett Smith to Quincy Jones's daughter, uh, all of them, everyone just having a hand in Tupac's life, him being a very studious individual, but putting on that persona, that thug life mentality. I don't think that was really a Tupac mentality. I don't think that that was really Tupac. I mean, yes, I think he was portraying a persona, and I mean, I think we all like we get up for the day to be like, oh yeah, this was me. But just be yourself, right? I know I try to remind myself, like when you do the show, that just be yourself so that someone can enjoy what you have to share and that others can be a part of it as well, but not to be like, "Ugh," like be someone else that I'm not, or in Tupac's case, to be a part of that thug life. I just don't think that was really Pac. I really find him to be that younger, studious individuals, and watching so many different documentaries on him and how smart Tupac really was, how he could have changed the platform of the hip hop community to this day. It's unfortunate, again, that he won't we won't see his likeness for another generation. I mean, you just don't. You mean just like the Beatles or John Lennon or these large artists like Kurt Cobain or the tragic death of the drummer from the Foo Fighters. It just you these are big losses, and for the hip hop community, you talked about within 6 months two tragic losses: the death of Tupac and the death of Notorious B.I.G., which I think at that point then wiped out the whole West Coast East Coast rivalry. So again, if you have thoughts, you want to share your comments. Maybe you grew up in the '90s and you were a huge hip hop fan. What's your recollection of those the East Coast West Coast rivalry? I know I dabbled in some of it at that point in time. I know I was much more into Tupac stuff because living on the West Coast just was that's West Coast was the best coast. But getting into how even like Notorious B.I.G. having some of these bangers with Notorious Thug uh with Bone Thugs and Harmony, Life After Death. I mean, that album was just fire. There's so much on those that album. And Tupac, it almost like felt like in Tupac's case, putting out All Eyes on Me, the double disc, one of the best all-time hip hop records, in my opinion. You can have yours if you have an opinion. If you're an East Coast or West Coast person, let us know what your thoughts are. If you're on Twitch, let us know. I'd love to hear from you. You can send those to me at 775 990 5151. The texts are coming in. Derek says he was West Coast, big. He loved, he says that he was a huge fan of Tupac, but also was like me. He loved Notorious B.I.G. as well. If he had to pick one, who's see what else? Kyle in Arizona, who's watching, says he was also a West Coast person and loved Notorious, loved them both, but he was more of a Tupac fan. So yeah, I mean, it happens. As we get close to wrapping things up, again, if you have story ideas that you'd like to share with us, remember, the show doesn't exist without you. Again, the show is powered by volunteers, just like a lot of things in life. It takes a small village to put this talk show together. So if you have a show idea, please send it my direction. We'd love to have your idea. Maybe you had a sighting and you want to share it. Send it to me. Let me know. Send it to me via text 775 990 5151. The text line's always open 24/7. So if you have something, maybe you want us to come to your community, to be a part of the community, to come and do a show out there, let me know. I'd love to hear from you. You can email me, Mario at onairmario.com. You can go to our website to subscribe to our podcast as well. We'd love to hear from you and your thoughts in regards to what shows you want us to do, where you want us to be. I'd love to get down to Ocean Shores and do something down there and do a live show down in the Ocean Shores area. Do something back in the Seattle area for our other affiliates here locally, and continue to take the show on the road, and maybe expand down to Portland as well. Maybe you know of a Sasquatch conference that's coming up. We'd love to hear from you. Maybe you got a ghost encounter. We'd love to hear from you too about your ghost encounters. Look, this show does not exist without your help. If you have suggestions of show ideas, or maybe you had an encounter or something, look, it's all going to be confidential, private. We just love to hear from you. Let us know what your thoughts are in regards to that. We'd love to be able to have you be a part of the show as a contributor as well. Maybe you can share it to us. Again, 775-990-5151. Just send us a text. That also is the number you can call if you just want to leave a voicemail and say, hey, this is what happened, Mario. Thank you so much. Again, this show is driven by supporters like you. We are not paid, but it takes a village to run this. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you to all of our affiliates who across the platform take the show and watch. So if you have a show idea, send it to me via email, Mario at onairmario.com, or you can send it via text or call me 775-990-5151. As we continue to wrap things up here from the Pacific Northwest, I'd like to thank you tonight for hanging out with us, hanging out with me and listening and being a part of the show. So thank you so much to all our affiliates, KOSW, KGRG, KAPY, our flagship studio, KVI, and our newest member, North Beach Community TV. Thank you so much for being a part of the U.S. Phenomenon family. For my entire team, Jeff Jens, who handles the website, Sophia Magana, who's a contributing member of Stories, Mark Christopher, who does the Paranormal Story of the Week, and myself, Mario Magana. Be sure to look up at the sky, because you never know what you might see. Good night.